B.I.D. Borrower in distress. The following is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are not prepared for experimentation, gore, blood, capture, and torture, please refrain from reading or listening. This is an experiment to see how far I can push my descriptive limits when it comes to macabre and dark themes. Viewers, readers, listeners, be advised. Part 3. Astonishment and relief in equal parts to mortification filled him as Simon uttered his precious sister's name. It took every ounce of remaining strength for him to stand and place his hands on the edge of the cage. Elation and terror mingled together, spiking the rate of his heart as he stared at his little sister. She was wearing her hip lamp and only carried a small bag with her, a hook on her side. At first, her look was of worry and concern, but it quickly twisted to awful shock as the green eyes they shared flicked from wound to wound. He was sure that the shadows only accentuated the damage he'd endured, just as the shadows exaggerated her expression. Abandoning her training that he spent years drilling into her, Piper darted forward and pressed her hands against the plastic cage, mirroring his own. Tears were filling her eyes, mouth agape. No words came out, but her expressive eyes said it all. He could read every micro-expression and emotion in her features as her eyes continued to take in recent events. Worry, confusion, resentment, thankfully not for him. Fear, frustration, pain, almost beyond measure. Part of Simon thought he could actually see remnants of memories reflecting in her glossing eyes, but he couldn't place what they were. Not now. Too much was swirling in his own mind, drowning him. It tore at his guts, but protecting her came first. This place was dangerous. That human was even more dangerous. Who knew if or when he would be back? For all Simon knew, that horrid Miles character could be just on the other side of the door, waiting to see if he heard anything. The fate he currently suffered from the simple mistake of losing his footing and getting stuck in a beaker was something he never wanted his sister to endure. He needed to get her to leave. "Piper, you shouldn't be here." His voice came out in broken, craggy fragments. He hadn't realized how thirsty he'd been from strangling his own screams and trying to maintain consciousness through heavy breathing. "Of course I should," hissed Piper, eyes flicking to the door and her voice low to keep anyone other than her older brother from hearing her. I came looking for you when you weren't back right away. I saw you. What was the human doing to you? What was on your arms and legs? Simon." Piper's eyes gleamed with tears that finally spilled over the rims of her eyes. It pained him for her to see him like this. He'd always been the invincible brother, and now he was mortal. He had watched them fill up with every word she spoke. Unable to do anything else, he reached up to the air hole and fished his fingers through. The hole was just big enough for his hands to slip through, and instantly Piper was grasping at his fingers. Her height kept her on her tiptoes to reach, but it didn't seem to matter. Simon noticed his sister glancing at his shredded forearms and the odd, sticky device still attached to his chest. It was crushing seeing someone Simon loved in pain. On the flip side, he couldn't imagine what she must be feeling. He could venture a guess, though. Piper's lip quivered as she fought off the urge to sob uncontrollably. The way she touched his hand felt like she was trying to pour every ounce of love into it, like she'd never see him again. Her shoulders trembled, like the time she had accidentally been locked outside in the cold a few winters ago. The memory was oddly warming and brought a smile to Simon's lips despite his lack of desire to. "Piper," he said quietly. "It's okay. You'll be okay." No, I won't be okay. And neither will you if we don't get you out of there." The volume of his sister's voice was startling, and it made both borrowers pause and glance at the cabinet door with bated breath. It was as if at any moment the door would fly open and Miles would be standing there with a room full of humans ready to tear the siblings apart. Chill subsiding, the two looked at one another, mirrored eyes locking, before Simon clenched and unclenched his jaw. I know. At least, I know for me. But you can be okay," said Simon. Alarm filled his sister's features. The statement startled her so much that she actually relinquished her grip on his fingers and stepped away. Despair filled Simon's heart, but he kept his features stern despite the desire to break, filling him with anxiousness. "What are you saying?" she breathed. "You're not suggesting that I leave you, are you?" The look on her brother's face said it all, and it was appalling. "Simon, no! We're not leaving you! We're not just going to immigrate and leave you behind. We'll get you out. We'll put together some kind of thing. I don't know, device? We'll get it to carve through the wall or open the latch. Something. Anything." Her words were frantic. The tremble that was once in her shoulders had spread through the rest of her body and into her voice. "Piper, look at this thing. Hard plastic. The latch is a hard clamp, and it would barely be enough for me to squeeze out if you managed to get it open," stated Simon flatly. "We can get you out. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are," Simon snapped. It made his little sister retract as more tears slipped down her cheeks, outlining her thin features. Goodness, she's so much like Mom, determined and fierce, thinking with her heart instead of her head. "Simon," she sniffled. She looked so much like she did when she was a child, standing pitifully like he'd eaten the last strawberry cream chocolate, which he would never do since it was her favorite. I don't... I can't just leave you. You don't know what that human will do to you." I'll be and if you say that you'll be okay, I swear I'll come in there and I'll beat your butt," sobbed Piper. She buried her face in her hands and attempted to wipe away the tears. Simon swallowed dryly and pressed his hands against the container once again. It took a minute, but Piper stepped up to the cage once more and fished her fingers through the hole, and Simon responded in kind. "You're right," he mumbled. Piper simultaneously shook and nodded her head, making an odd swaying motion. I don't know if I'll be okay. I don't know what this thing is on me. I don't know if I'll get out. I don't know what the humans' plans are, but I'll never forgive myself if this happens to you. Simon felt himself shaking, as if Piper's jitters were traveling through her hand and down his arm. A pouting, frustrated look flared in the younger borrower's eyes. Now she definitely looks like Mom. So you're just giving up? Like the scrape on his leg, her words burned. If he weren't so exhausted, he would have snarked back. Given the circumstances and his situation, he elected against it. He shook his head, saying, "No, I'm not giving up. But I already made one escape attempt and failed. If it's going to happen, we need to make sure it's going to work. The shudder that seized his spine as he remembered the harsh blows to his side was completely involuntary, and Piper noticed. I can't go through that. Not again." His fingers grasped harder as he kept his eyes on his sister. Had she always had those freckles? When did her hair get those subtle red highlights? As if he'd never seen her before, he spent every second he could memorizing his sister's face. His stomach dropped lower and lower as the thought of him possibly never seeing her again began to consume him. She has to go. She needs to leave this place. She shouldn't come back. Unless she and the others can get me out. Pip. Her childhood nickname only made her collapse to her knees, abandoning that anchoring grip Simon had been relying on to keep himself composed. He crouched in front of her, attempting to ignore the smear marks his own blood had left on the plastic, and kept his hands pressed against the barrier. As she'd done so many times, including earlier when he left, she pressed her head against the plastic, and he did the same. In silence, the siblings crouched in the dim lamp light. It was gut-wrenching, but nothing could be done. Simon knew it. Piper knew it. As miserable and as terrified as he was, Simon was grateful that it wasn't his little sister in here. He would take this every day, knowing she was safe. It had been a while, or maybe no time at all. Simon wasn't sure. What he did know was that a growing apprehension was filling his insides, like mildly warm water, making him sick to his stomach. Every second she was here was another second she could get caught as well. Though Simon wasn't sure whether or not Miles was coming back anytime soon, the risk of having the comfort of his sister wasn't worth her safety. He pulled his throbbing head back away from the soothing coolness of his container and caught his sibling's eye. Pip, it's time. You need to get out of here. Get help. Make a plan. Move. Just... whatever you do, don't come back. Not unless you're sure you can get me out. It's not safe here for you, said Simon. He clenched his jaw, nose and eyes tingling as tears threatened to come for the second time. No, not in front of her. Stay strong. It's not safe for you either, Piper countered. I know, but I don't have a choice in the matter right now. You do. And you need to go. Simon even managed a half-hearted smile as he finished. Don't worry, I'll be here. This earned a stiff, off-guard chuckle, which devolved into soft, whimpering sobs from Piper. She dug the heel of her hand into her eyes, attempting to squeeze out any remaining tears, and stood abruptly while digging through the bag at her side. Your bag. It was taken. You need to eat and drink. She choked as she fished out a small piece of plastic wrap with some kind of bread inside, and another piece of thin plastic obviously filled with water. Oh, bless her. It took finagling to get both items through the hole, but the two borrowers finally accomplished the life-saving task. It took every effort Simon had left to not scarf down the rations he'd been given. His hands trembled as they held the fragment of bread within its casing. Thank you, Pip. Hopefully this'll last me for a bit, smiled Simon, hesitantly, trying to sound more confident than how he felt. He said it by the only clean part of the base of his plastic prison and forced himself upright, a task that proved a challenge as his head swirled. Instinct threw his hand out in time to catch himself against the wall of the plastic back in front of his sister. He clenched and unclenched his jaw, noticing how his sister witnessed the whole encounter. Simon, she muttered, striking a pang in his heart. Pip, the faster you go and tell the others, the sooner all of you can find a way to get me out of here. Get the right tools, warn others to stay away, and not look for me unless they're ready to spring me, urged Simon. The younger borrower swallowed hard and once again fished her fingers through the hole at the top of the cage, and her brother responded in kind. For several more minutes, they gripped at the other's fingers, unwilling to relinquish their only tether of physical connection. It was only when Simon pulled away that Piper's eyes filled with tears as he uttered a brief, "It's time, Pip." Her shoulders were shaking violently. She was unwilling to even take a single step away, but Simon's convicted nod of assurance prompted her to move. One step, then another, then another. She backed away, shadows making her look hollow and miserable. The edge of the cabinet was in sight. Still, she lingered. Simon nodded coaxingly again, hands still pressed against the plastic, before she made it to the exit. His sister, never turning away, looked at him one last time, before saying, "I love you, Simon, and I swear I'll get you out of this." "I know. I love you too, Pip." And then she was gone, lamp light vanishing back into the walls and leaving Simon completely and utterly alone. The hollow pit in his gut expanded. It made him feel empty. He could have sworn that he heard his sister crying just on the other side of the wall. Every ounce of luck he had he sent with her. Not that he had any to spare. Every bit of cleverness and determination was undoubtedly going to be something he needed if he was going to survive this. Calm down. You need rest, and you need to make sure Miles can't find the food and water. For now, get something to settle your stomach. He sat down back in the corner where he was and unwrapped the bread. The smell alone made his mouth water, but he'd known hunger before and knew how to fight it. Carefully, he took a pinch and chewed thoughtfully, savoring the taste as if he'd never tasted bread before. Little sips of water wet his parched mouth and quenched the raw burning in his throat. The borrower admittedly ate more than he probably should have, but considering rationing food for long term might not be possible because of the lack of hiding places and what Miles was capable of, Simon didn't want to take the chance of only having a little something to eat. He paused mid-chew as the dreaded thought of this being his last meal crossed his mind. It felt impossible to swallow the bite. It lodged somewhere in his throat, which had constricted while the rest of his body began to shiver. No, don't think like that. I'm going to get out of here. I'm... Simon sighed. I'm in so much trouble, and I don't know what I'm going to do. What he did know was he had some proactive measures. First and foremost, hiding his rations. Simon hated to do it, but necessity is the mother of invention, and with almost nothing to his name, he needed to get creative. Using parts of his pant, legs, and slipping his cut shirt off of his body, he tenderly wrapped his rations in a way they wouldn't easily fall out if disturbed, and even managed to bandage up his arms. After the clever borrower wrapped the bread and water, as well as his injured arms, he finally allowed himself to curl up and rest. His eyelids were heavy, and any amount of rest was essential to stay strong against whatever was being planned for him. I hope it's nothing. It won't be. But perhaps there will be a change in conscious. Until then, I need to... The jolt of the cage sent a panicked charge unlike any other through Simon's entire body. Immediately, the borrower was on all fours, crouched and prepared to force himself to his feet, to run or tumble out of the way. The blinding light of early morning reflected off of the beakers and cast harsh shadows around the room. Only the silhouette of his tormentor was visible. But it was enough to strike fear into Simon's core. The cage jostled as meaty fingers snagged either side of the cage and pulled it out of the cabinet, pausing only for a moment to readjust to the handhold at the top. Simon only glanced down a fraction of an inch and spotted the plummet down to the ground directly beneath him. Heights never bothered Simon, but he had always been in control of his descent. Now he was sent into an almost free fall that swung away from the slick counter at the last second, only to slam down onto one of the experiment islands. Each sound made Simon flinch, palms pressed against his ears to help dampen the piercing noises all around him. He kept his eyes open, though, and he wasn't reassured. Miles once again loomed over the cage before stepping off to some nearby cabinets and filling a tray with a collection of tools and implements. Many of them looked like the ones he used the previous day, but there were others that Simon didn't recognize that seemed more menacing. Some were thin and metallic, while others looked like shortened, handheld pipes that were lined on one side, but not the other. Something in Simon's instincts told him that those were going to be dangerous.
Looks like you managed to MacGyver yourself a pillow. Good that you got some sleep. We've got a busy day today. Cleared my schedule and everything,
Grinned Miles.
First things first is getting a few baselines. So, let's get started, shall we?
Simon watched the immense arm reach over, pull his prison closer, and attach something to the back that looked like a pole. A small pin at the top clicked to the side, and, as he'd predicted, the back of the cage began to advance on him, gliding forward like an ominous translucent ghost. His instinct to fight brought Simon to his feet, and with nothing to lose, he threw himself against the advancing wall. His feet slid against the ground, and when facing it didn't work, he spun around and tried to use his back. Closer. 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 The wall next to the door was now a few inches away. Simon dared not lock his arms as it came within reach. Something told him Miles wouldn't care and would press on whether his arms snapped like twigs or not. Each inch he advanced made Simon's heart rate spike. He breathed rapidly, but tried to maintain control with each inhalation. In through his nose, out through the mouth. The little bit of bread he'd had was no longer in his system to keep the bile from choking the back of his throat. He glared indignantly up at Miles as, finally, the walls sandwiched him firmly in place. The borrower locked his jaw and tried to not show the panic in his eyes when Miles grabbed sets of tongs and unlatched the door.
Oh, what's that look for? Come on. We're just doing some baselines for the next few days. A little testing here and there. Most uncomfortable you'll be is giving me adequate samples,
Snarked Miles. In record speed, he opened the cage and managed to snag Simon's body by the torso with tongs. Fitting it over, the odd device still adhered to Simon's front and back. The pressure from the wall released as Simon felt himself hoisted into the air, with the enthusiasm of a young child playing with a Barbie doll. Struggling was futile, and yet he did anyway, fingers grasping and attempting to pry off the tongs from his body. The mocking smirk only infuriated him more, and spurred on a harder struggle.
It's so persistent. I wonder what your mental faculties are. Accompanied with your resilience, this might be the find of a lifetime,
Grinned Miles. Simon continued to kick and shove, legs dangling as they flailed. The human chuckled again and proceeded to attach two odd prong-like devices to the metal knobs on Simon's front and back. Cords dangled from the borrower, and a sound began beeping with rapid pulses after Miles tapped on the strange box that Simon had seen the day before. Again, each breath in made one set of lines, and his heartbeat made another. An odd red box led to the wires and sticky circles on his chest. It beeped and clicked from time to time, which seemed to keep Miles transfixed. Each breath Simon took made the line spike, and as his heart raced, the beeping intensified. Just like yesterday. So that thing can hear my heart?
You really ought to relax. I need a proper baseline,
instructed Miles. He kept the tongs firmly clamped around Simon's torso, digging into his ribs and stomach as he lowered him onto the counter and onto some kind of black square. Blinding red numbers danced across the screen by Simon's feet as he was momentarily released from the tongs, which hovered only half an inch from his torso, daring him to sprint for his life. Challenge accepted. Simon turned to sprint away when the startling, crushing pressure returned as Miles collapsed the tongs around Simon's chest.
You don't weigh very much, but it appears you're proportional. Other than using your shirt for a pillow, I can't see the rest of you,
mumbled Miles as he laid Simon onto his back, tongs still firmly in place. The weight was too much for Simon to move any significant distance, but not being dangled was a better alternative than being held up carelessly in the air. The borrower wasn't sure what baseline was supposed to mean, but if him breathing hard and struggling messed up the human's work, then but Simon was determined to do everything possible to not comply. 10 minutes. 20, 30, 5. Simon alternated between letting himself rest and struggling harder to make the little device beep. It wasn't hard to do, especially as he watched as Miles began tipping and mixing things together in an odd stone basin. The sound of grinding and crushing filled the room. The scraping of the pillar-like device against the stone basin inspired nightmarish images of bones being ground to powder. He swallowed dryly, eyes transfixed on the human's hands, as he attempted once again to drag himself away. 1 inch, maybe 2. With almost no acknowledgement, Miles reached over with lackadaisical effort and instantly erased Simon's progress as he was dragged back by the cage. Simon's palms made a slight squeaking sound as he was returned to his original spot.
Where do you think you're going?
Asked Miles.
It seems like you're pretty keen to get back to the walls. Why? Have another one of whatever you are waiting for you?
It took every ounce of control in Simon's body to keep Miles's statement from making him look panicked. He locked his jaw and kept his eyes averted as he once again tried to scoot away, while his anxiety-inducing thoughts spiked. How did he know? Does he know about Piper? Was she caught? Or was someone else taken? Heavens above, please let her be okay. Each thought created a pang in his chest. An aching, untouchable hurt clenched his chest. The beeping intensified. But was it because of Miles's statement, or his struggling? Simon hoped Miles wouldn't be able to tell the difference, as Simon, though exhausted, began to try and inch away again, trying harder this time. The seconds that passed were painful. The borrower's instincts told him Miles was watching him out of the corner of his eye. What else was he noticing? He didn't look like the most observant human, but then again, Simon had always considered himself observant and careful, and now look where he was. Miles clicked his tongue and scoffed.
What? Nothing? It would make sense that there are more of you. The chances of just one minuscule bipedal creature running around the lab is absolutely ludicrous. And yet, here you are. Statistically speaking, it's impossible now that you exist, that you're the only one. But I'll worry about that. Need to see if my first test subject is a viable candidate.
Viable candidate? Well, at least he doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't know. At least not the specifics.
Seeing that it's almost been an hour and you've refused to calm down, I'm forced to use alternative methods.
Sighed Miles, snagging the finger hole in the tongs and dragging Simon across the slick surface until he was directly in front of him, nearly 6 inches from Miles's rotund abdomen. Other clamps came out and snagged Simon's forearms and legs with ease, clawing into the tender, raw flesh that had been torn away. He hated to admit it to himself, but Simon's struggles weren't as vigorous as they were yesterday. Damaging what was already in ribbons wasn't going to help him get out of here. That is, he had subsided his struggles until he saw one of those thin, metallic things that looked like sewing needles attached to one of the translucent tubes. Evidently they fit together, and whatever was in it was not going to be good for him. Miles lowered it closer and closer to Simon's body. Again he thrashed, and only tore further into his arms. Immobile, helpless, terrified. Simon only glimpsed the fascinated gleam in Miles's face as he lowered the sewing needle closer and closer to Simon's arm. From here, Simon could see that the needle was different than the ones he'd borrowed in the past. This one had a hollow tip, being connected to that tube filled with a solution that was an off-clear color, like water, but not. Miles's gloved fingers came up and pressed against Simon's right shoulder and down along his arm, keeping the appendage pinned firmly against the cold lab counter surface. He attempted to thrash again, but it swiftly was put to an end when Miles's finger once again flicked the back of Simon's head with the ease of swatting a gnat. His head whiplashed to the side, a crack almost audible, and stunned him momentarily.
Quit squirming, you little twat. You might make me miss.
The needle pressed against Simon's arm. The tip was cold and wet. Neither of these things unnerved Simon, though. It was the sharp pinch of the tip of the hollow needle as it slipped beneath his skin. It snapped him out of his temporary stun just in time to witness the event. Simon gasped and tried to squirm, but he was effectively immobilized by the human monster in front of him. Miles tapped the end of the tube, and suddenly, Simon felt like his arm was swelling. A sensation of cold from inside his veins was horrifying, and the scream that ripped out of him felt unnatural, like it wasn't his own. The chill crawled through him. He could feel it, like water poured over his head slowly. Whatever was inside him now almost felt like it had a life of its own. Miles removed his fingers, as well as the hollow needle. A gush of blood oozed from the puncture mark, puddling under the borrower's arm. It happened both gradually and all at once as Simon continued a new round of thrashing, as Miles removed his hand completely and began scratching notes while watching the captive borrower. The feeling hit his head first. Lethargy. An uncontrollable desire to sleep engulfed his brain. His eyes drooped. His rushing thoughts instantly began to slow to a crawl. The instincts in his limbs, however, continued to fight until they were cold and numb, resting finally at his sides. Sound felt further away. Sparks of pain kept him conscious. One thought ultimately arose to the surface. I'm done for. The human's chuckle was slowed, like it was being heard through the echoing metal air vents Simon frequented mere days before. Simon could have sworn he heard that miserable human talking about how good he was being, and how it was about time he settled down. The mocking only continued in Simon's mental prison as the pressure from around his forearms and calves released. It was an embarrassingly long amount of time. He couldn't begin to guess. Where Simon was no longer restrained, yet didn't realize it, as his mind and body were under the control of the injection. Simon felt his body lift and twist. At one point, he dangled limply against the human's fingers, the sound of slicing fabric followed by a chill spelling bad news.
This medicinum worked wonders on you. Good to know. I can't rely on that for all the tests, but a couple of initial baselines can't hurt as long as it's in my notes.
Throbbing aches deep in his head, followed by the conscious effort of reaching up to press his palm against his forehead. Every cell felt weighted, muscles ached, cold reached deep within the borrower's bones, unlike any fever he'd ever endured. It was all-consuming. Every millimeter of his body felt exposed, and a quick glance down only confirmed Simon's fears. Nude. He'd been stripped completely from head to toe now. Simon instinctually rolled onto his side and covered himself with his shaking hands and realized he was once again in the cage. It wasn't put away in the cabinet, oddly enough to his dismay, and was just sitting out on the lab station countertop. His shirt and pants weren't just removed, they were missing. So much for the bread and water, Simon thought. He glanced down and saw the wires hadn't been removed this time off of the device adhered to his chest and back. In fact, they had been fished through 2 of the air holes of the cage and still attached to the red box that beeped. Simon wasn't sure when he started shaking, nor did he have any desire to stop. It was the only indication that he was alive and reacting normally to the torment he was enduring. Each breath parched his throat. Every attempt at opening his eyes made his head throb. Never before had he ever wanted to hide in a cabinet, even if it was in a cage. Oh, what on earth was that stuff that Miles put in me? How did he do it? Just hollow out a sewing needle? What kind of psycho does that? Into another person? What even was that stuff he put in me? It's causing all sorts of issues right now. I need to get out of here. Simon forced his eyes open, ignoring the throbbing in the back of his head that radiated throughout every part of his brain, and looked around hard again. His clothes were just outside of the cage. The momentary recognition of his personal belongings evolved before his eyes into a mortifying scene. Yes, he saw his clothes, but they were on a pinboard. Like a delicate butterfly on display, his clothes were splayed in the same revealing, macabre way. One of the arms were opened on one side, while the rest of the body that had been cut up the middle flared out like a makeshift cape. The pants had obviously been cut up the back, but arranged in such a way that made them seem like one whole piece of clothing, rather than the sliced to ribbons version. What really made his gut churn was that both the bread and water were also pinned next to the place he'd hidden it, inside of his clothes. The secret pocket also on display. If he'd had anything to eat or drink, tears would have lined his slim features and the bile in his throat would have something to burn other than the back of his mouth. How can humans be this cruel? Simon, for all his life, had been warned about the savagery of humans. Every story paled in comparison. Every experience fell short. This was hell. The stupid sensor inside of the device he was attached to began to beep. Like an alarm, it was undoubtedly signaling Miles that he was awake. Simon laid back down onto the ground and grasped the plastic wires attached to him. One tug, then another. Nothing. Perhaps it was because he was too weak, or his injuries were preventing him from straining himself. Whatever the case, there was no way Simon could unclick the device on his chest from making that horrendous, mind-throbbing sound. If I did manage to get the one on the front off, I still have to get the one on my back.
Oh, good. You're awake again. I was starting to wonder if I'd given you too much.
Miles's voice electrified the air, making Simon flinch and instinctually back away to the furthest part of the cage.
On the bright side, managing to finally get a look at you and take inventory of what you've got. You know, proportionally speaking, you're an excellent specimen. Also, big for your size. Simon immediately bristled, clenched his jaw, and, without thinking, stood up and glared hard at Miles.
Despite his instincts screaming otherwise, Simon reacted. He knew it was a mistake the moment he saw Miles's lips spread into an eager smile. Still, this was a matter of personal pride. To be stripped down to nothing and kept like a lab experiment only to have a comment about his manhood was demeaning. Between exhaustion and pain, Simon knew he'd made a mistake. But he wasn't sure that he would be alive long enough to care.
Well,
Breathed Miles.
seems like someone's a bit shy. No matter. That's a subjective term, based on observation and self-proclamation. I'm not interested in that. For now.
He strode over to the lab counter and straddled a stool, slapping a stack of papers down onto the table beside Simon's cage. The borrower's momentary glance at the title made his momentary boldness chill in an instant. Blood running cold like ice. He read the title. Examination of Minuscule Man. An anatomical analysis and proposal for alternative experimentation. He swallowed hard and retracted once more to the back of the cage, slumping and covering himself as best as he could. Each breath was accompanied with a swirling sensation in his head. The dizziness felt uncontrollable. It was a constant downward spiral that had no end. Each step down felt like the bottom, only to have it pulled out from under him. No. He's got to continue this. Taking notes. Poking and prodding. No wonder why he took my clothes. Didn't want a specimen to do anything rash.
Turns out, you and I are not so different. Taking a look at what little blood I was able to glance at, heart rate, and overall anatomical configuration, I've concluded so far that we are only off by a few degrees of separation. Must have happened some time in the evolution of our species. Whatever the case, this is good news for me. That I'll need a few more samples and another day or two of baseline. But I'm confident in my hypothesis.
Miles spoke as casually as long-term friends over a simple cup of coffee. None of those words were reassuring, and Simon could only curl in further on himself as the words sank in. So much of this was wrong. Just wrong. It was more apparent now than ever that speaking would only be a detriment to himself. No escape. No way out. Desperately, he wanted to be rescued. At the same time, he hoped more than anything that everyone was leaving, saving themselves. Rescue seemed like a dim candle in a hurricane. A desire wouldn't be enough to get him out. At this point, a whole army of borrowers might not be enough either. When the tongs came for him again, Simon barely had the will to fight against it. The borrower was lifted from the cage and splayed out just in front of his pinned clothes. The clamps pried, the forming scabs free from his forearms as he was spread out. The cold racked his body. It was clear he was no longer in control of his faculties. The trembling was involuntary. The nerves were involuntary. The screams of pain were involuntary. His words seemed to be the only thing he could control, and Simon was bent on keeping it that way. Even as he watched Miles approach again with one of those odd needles, he kept his jaw tight and growled through the pain as it punctured his skin, this time on his left arm. Dizziness seized him as he watched his blood being pulled out of him through that hole in his arm. The removed needle instantly left a deep purple-blue bruise. and the place from earlier was swollen and bruised in the same pattern. The stinging spread through his arm, which slickened with residual blood as it, like the first wound, oozed and gushed. Exhaustion dragged Simon in and out of consciousness rapidly. 1 second he would be awake. Another second his eyes would be lolling open and time couldn't be accounted for. Tired had little to no meaning now. Of everything he'd ever done, never had he been worn out like this. Lethargy controlled his movements as he was once again released back into the cage. He stumbled to the back, collapsing to his knees before succumbing to unconsciousness. Time passed, and the next time Simon opened his eyes, he spotted 2 small petri dishes. One was filled with some sweet-smelling citrus scent, and the other possessed something akin to a trail mix. Simon trusted neither. Unquenchable thirst plagued him, and his insides yearned for a single chip piece. He attempted to refuse both, turning his attention instead to the stiff, throbbing wounds on his arms and legs and abdomen. Bruise upon bruise created rings and layers of pain and sensitivity. The place on his left arm hurt worse, but the tension in his right was almost unbearable. Any movement was sluggish and radiated heat. The burning intensified with each twitch or prod.
I don't know what's worse. Starving to death and succumbing to the human's torment, or trying to fight and survive this. No, I can't think like that. I have to.
Simon stared at the 2 dishes, vision blurring as his eyes lulled and crossed. His head started to throb again. He grabbed either side and curled in on himself. What little heat his body was producing was a welcome relief to the frigid air around him. Each minute movement sent rippling aches and pains through the borrower's body. It trembled and shook, all on its own, no matter what technique he tried to warm and calm himself. He noticed his movements were limited, and saw that the cords were still attached and fished through the air holes of his container.
I have to think. I have to find a way out of here. Maybe the others will think of something. No, I can't rely on them. They'll take one look at this cage and run. I'm on my own.
Simon groaned as his headache intensified. It was the first utterance he'd made since his sister's visit.
Maybe I can use the plastic around whatever these cords are. Peel them back and use the plastic. That's what they feel like anyway.
No luck. Despite how he pried, like how he'd done previously when trying to get the cords off of his body, they were too strong. As a borrower, getting something new was few and far between. Everything was either already half-eaten, partially used, or abandoned and in need of repair. New cords and lights were hard to come by. Never did he wish so hard for something rusted and decrepit.
No use.
Simon choked back the bile once more.
I'm not getting out of here. I'm done for.
Fatigue riddled his body and dragged him unwillingly back into unconsciousness to the nightmares that awaited him. A looming human with gleaming teeth hovering inches above him. Unable to move or scream as needles protruded from his body, life was being drained out of him into long, thin tubes, which made the figure grin and cackle to himself. The waking world was just as cruel. Miles was back bright and early, and the experiments intensified. The first couple of days were repeat performances of his first full day. Needles slipped in and out of him like a hot knife to butter. Parts of Simon's body ached and bled consistently, leaving his body scarred and bruised. More devices were brought out to restrain Simon's movements, each more brutally eating away the flesh on his arms and legs. The added torment of Miles realizing Simon wasn't eating only led to tubes being forced into his mouth, and the borrower choking on the contents as it flooded his throat. Torment intensified from there. Long blades cut and sliced along his flesh when needles couldn't retrieve the blood they were looking for. Scabs were scraped or pried away, as a phone camera documented the macabre display. The whole time, Miles narrated his theories and curiosities in an attempt to goad Simon into speaking. In agony, Simon only ever allowed himself to scream. It was the next few weeks that proved to Simon that not only was he on his own, but that humans were capable of far worse things than he'd ever heard in his stories. After the first week, Miles proclaimed that his baseline had been established, and that it was confirmed that Simon was a suitable, analogous substitute that would revolutionize the world.
You should be grateful. You're helping me in my research. This is going to save lives in my academic career. Those hacks are going to come crawling back when they see the results you and I are going to produce.
Simon clamped down, watched as another needle approached. He attempted to struggle and pull away, but his aching, bruised body was sluggish at best. The tube had some kind of yellow-green liquid inside of it. There was no smell. Not that there ever was beyond the antiseptic that Miles used to scrub his fingers, but something about this needle seemed more ominous than anything else the human had brought before. The pinch of the needle was all too familiar, as was the threatening curl of Miles's finger as it prepared to strike him in the chest for disobeying. Simon ground his teeth as the contents of the tube pushed its way into his body. Like so many other things, he swore he could feel it crawling through his veins. This was different, though. It felt thicker, slower, menacing. As it spread through his body, Simon's mind trembled at every thought as to what this new serum would do to him. Would it knock him unconscious? Make him talk? Make his insides split open for easy display? Simon didn't know. He couldn't begin to know. What was different than any other time was that he was immediately returned to his cage after the injection, without blacking out, and left alone until the end of the day where the injection was repeated. Simon had to admit that he was relieved that it was only an injection now. But the more terrible thought was why things were suddenly changing after so many days of the same torture. What was more disturbing was that many other things changed simultaneously within him that he couldn't explain. Miles stopped feeding him, but he wasn't getting thinner or hungrier. Injections continued, and blood was drawn prior to each injection. Weight was taken, as were photos, notes scribbled, one-sided conversations as Miles rattled on and on about how he was successfully creating a supplement for emergency kits and rations. Eventually, his weight did start to see a decrease, but the feeding didn't increase, nor did his appetite. Each interaction pulled Simon further and further into himself. The pain wasn't as intense, and his mind somehow was able to slip into a blank box until he was once again left alone, numb to so many things all around him now. Simon wasn't sure how many days had passed, or if anyone had even bothered checking to see if he was alive. Was his sister okay? Were the other borrowers running away or watching the horror from the ceiling vents, preparing to rescue him when they had enough supplies? Was Miles sharing his information with other humans? Was his kind exposed? Maybe every other borrower was being hunted down right now because he was caught. When the door opened so many mornings later, Simon curled further into himself to hide away from Miles's onslaught of suffering. But immediately, he sensed something different. The thunderous steps were the same, but quicker too. The sound of rattling keys made him shake and pull to the far corner of the cage.
Remember, you swore not to say anything to anyone about this,
said Miles, voice muffled from the other side of the cabinet. The words were bone-chilling, because Simon knew what they meant. Miles had someone with him. The cabinet door unlocked and swung open, blinding light flooding the compartment that had been his container's prison for so long. The cage jostled and was yanked forward, slamming Simon's head against the back of the cage, despite him bracing for it. As the borrower squinted, trying to adjust his eyes to the light, he blinked and suddenly found himself eye to eye with Miles, but the hair on the back of his neck raised.
Behind me.
Simon was shaking uncontrollably as he forced himself to look over his shoulder to see another human. He'd seen this one before, and it churned his stomach the way her coal-black eyes widened and closed the distance between them. It was like her stare could absorb any and all light around them, an abyss of darkness and unreadability. Her hands came up from beneath the clear cage, making it look like she could just reach through the bottom of the cage and drag Simon out. He scurried away in a fumbling, desperate way, but it didn't matter. As his back hit the wall behind him, Simon knew there was no escape and merely kept himself contained as he averted his eyes and buried them in his folded arms.
What am I gonna do? What can I do now? You're showing me off to others. I can't. How long do I have to do this? Please. Please don't let this be the end. Maybe that's why she's here. To end me. Good. I can't stay here like this. I have to do something. Either to anger them and have them do it or make a run for it.
Simon didn't hear their words, but he felt the familiar tongs snag his bruised midsection and began to drag him out. Like every other time, he grabbed at the plastic door and tried to fight, but it was no use. The barrier that seemingly protected him before was gone, and now he was face to face with the new human, an unreadable expression on her face as she examined him behind her glasses.
What more can you do to me? What more can you take away? What happens next?